Learn the most advanced recruiting techniques. Land the most desirable talent. Launch your company towards massive success. This is the Higher Power Radio Show with Rick Girard.
Today is all about timing. So we're going to talk about managing expectations for time and performance to make a key hire, which is more important now than it ever has been. The data is in, and we're going to give you a performance benchmark of what your expectations should be as far as time to fill a hire. Today's quote: if you're going to achieve excellence in big things, you develop the habit in little matters. Excellence is not an exception, it's a prevailing attitude. That, my friends, was said by Colin Powell. I'm Rick Girard, and welcome to the Higher Power Radio Show. Our mission is to provide proven tactical solutions to solve your company's toughest hiring challenges. We share insights from top-performing entrepreneurs and industry experts, like our guest today, Christian Spletzer. He's the founder and CEO of Clockwork Recruiting. After years of experience in the challenging world of executive search, Kristen founded Clockwork Recruiting to improve how search firms and their clients work together on retained search projects. He designed Clockwork to help recruiters demonstrate their consultative value to their clients at every stage of each project. And his company has created an industry benchmark report, which makes him the perfect guest for today's show. Christian, welcome to the Higher Power Radio Show today.
Thanks, Rick. Great to be here.
Yeah, happy to have you. We're going to cover a few things today. We're going to talk about the challenges and the data to support challenges in today's hiring landscape. And then we're going to talk about measurement and performance of what a great search looks like. So I have the experience that really search is all over the gamut. You could have retained search firms that just kind of take the money and do it, and you can have ones that are really involved and bring a lot of value to their clients. Let's talk about a little bit about measuring performance. You've got to tell me a little bit about how this report came to be and what it's about.
Yeah, absolutely. So backing up a little bit, Clockwork Recruiting is a project management application for that retained search space. So our customers use our application to run projects with their clients. And the idea is that's going to give their clients more insight into the project, how it's going, so that they can truly collaborate. As a result of our growing customer base and the projects that are run on it, we've got a ton of anonymized project data. So we get to kind of look at that data to look for trends, look for inefficiencies. And this year we launched this industry benchmark report, which is really just focusing on two key metrics. One is your days to placement. How long does it take on average to place a candidate across all industries, and we break it down into some finer points.
Okay.
And then your general placement rate. And what's that's just the likelihood that any given project is actually going to end in a placement. And so we started with those two, and then we did a little bit of a deep dive into them across a number of different things like industry and function.
So how many different search projects did you guys track?
Yeah, we started with about, I think, 23,000. And we started just kind of looking back over the last 3.5 years and focusing only on retained search. So we've got a pretty wide customer
So
base.
let's back up really quickly. I want to explain retained search to some of our audience. Retained search is basically being engaged to conduct the search. The firm or whoever's leading it is specifically hired for that role, and it's their responsibility to fill that. Yeah, it's exclusive, and they get paid a fee up front. There's a certain schedule, but there's different models to it. But it's the premise behind it is that you're getting a more dedicated service to fill that role.
Yep, one consultant, one client, one job to fill, and it's really, it typically goes hand in hand with the executive search.
Yep.
But we've seen that kind of change and go down a little bit more to the mid-level manager search, but focusing on the retained engagement and what that looks like.
Got it. Retained search firms are primarily taking a little bit more of a sniper approach as opposed to the shotgun approach.
Right.
All right.
I mean,
So
it's a consultative engagement. It is a different beast from what I think most people think of when they think of recruiting.
So what did you find? So let's talk about, you have a placement rate and a days to hire the placement.
So if you ask any recruiter or any retained recruiter how long a typical search takes, I think what you're probably going to get is a shrug of the shoulders and about 3 or 4 months. And that's just been sort of the lore of retained search. It's been ill-defined, and it's about right, because by what we saw, on average, over those 23,000 projects we looked at, the average is 123 days from start to finish, start to placement, right? Because we're not including those that kind of flunked out.
But that's the average across every discipline, every market.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, and just because in aggregate, we wanted to just get of the retained search industry, what's the average, and then we kind of break it down, further, which we'll talk about, I'm sure, in detail. And then the placement rate, we broke that out into three silos. One is the firm places the candidate. You get a successful placement, and that only happens about 71% of the time. Which
that's scary.
That is scary.
Yeah, to have a 20. So you're looking at what, 29% failure rate,
right? Especially when you're paying somebody to go and solve your problem. Yeah, and that stings. And these are key hires again. You're hiring a retained search firm because you have a really important role to fill, and you want to hire like the best person to help you do so. But knowing on average that the industry is hitting it only about 71% of the time, help set expectations in the minds of the clients who hire these search firms to what they expect.
Now, here's a question I have. Are you tracking things like quality of hire?
We're not tracking stick rate yet.
Okay.
That's maybe V2. There are different ways we can do that, but for this report, we just limited it to days to placement and placement rate.
See, that'd be a really interesting thing to be able to see what the stick rate has been, or the quality of hire somehow, how that correlates in performance. Because I tend to think that sometimes that best person for the role surfaces at the end of the search when you're close with somebody else. And timing plays a key component in this. When you're targeting maybe 10 to 20 people for this role, what ends up happening is sometimes it takes 30, 90 days for that person to finally get back to you.
Right. Yeah. So there's so many things that go into this business of retained search, and so many factors that contribute to these key metrics. I think that companies only care about two things with a qualifier. If you're hiring a search firm, you care, are you going to be able to place a good candidate fast? And we've talked good candidate, are you able to place them? That's placement rate. Fast is days to placement. Good is that subjective qualifier that we can measure with placement rate, and that's our next study.
Now, what's interesting is I find that some companies actually have a really high bar, which makes it even harder. That might extend it. There's extenuating circumstances, I think, that come into play here.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is the job of the consultant.
Yeah.
They have to play the role of a consultant. They have to go into every project with a sound process and a specialization to be, in this particular aspect, the smartest guy in the room. They have to be able to come in and lead the client along the entire process, and do so, with not only the confidence of their experience, but a sound process the client is collaborating with. So you talked about surfacing good candidates late in the game. That may just be a reality of running a project, but another way to shorten that cycle is to really have a strong kickoff and strategy and buy-in from day one, so that you and your client are in lockstep if you're the recruiter.
As a recruiter, you should have personal branding, and I think that would help you to gain connection to the people that you need to get a hold of too. If you've got credibility that's kind of built in, people are going to want to talk.
Absolutely.
To you.
Yeah. And not only on the client side, but as you're reaching out in these retained projects, is typically, you're sourcing passive candidates, people who aren't actively looking. And one of the key determinants of, being able to put someone in play is, are they actually going to return your phone call? And if you don't have that brand, if you don't have that network, you don't have the ability to get people to respond to your outreach, that's going to take longer for you to find that candidate. Let's
talk about the 71% placement rate, because I would imagine some of them probably had resulted in internal hires, right? Or internal referrals.
6+%. Yeah.
That's only 6%.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's what we got.
So then 22% is what? It's essentially, were they canceled? Did you guys track what made them unsuccessful at all? Were you able to?
We just tracked if they were canceled or terminated.
Got it.
So we didn't go into why.
Oh, so they were canceled or terminated.
Yep.
Okay.
Those are canceled contracts. Maybe the company shifted strategic plans somewhere along the way. Maybe.
So the recruiter could have canceled them too.
Sure.
They could have fired their client.
A personality. This is looking in aggregate at a whole a rather large data set. So any one reason probably exists in that data set. But as a former recruiter, I've been on my share of searches that they spiral out. And if you don't manage them, they get away from you. And when they end bad, they're ugly.
Oh, they get away from you quickly if you don't keep a handle on them.
Yep.
All right, if you're just joining us on the live stream or the podcast, you're listening to the Higher Power Radio Show. I'm Rick Girard, your host, and today our guest is Christian Spletzer. He's the CEO and founder of Clockwork Recruiting. And we're talking about time to hire. So this is, let's talk. Really, it's all really about ROI, right? Because if you don't get somebody in there quickly, your company may fail.
Yeah.
So let's talk about what a good search looks like, and maybe parlay that to how to choose the right partner. You have a breakdown in your report of a detailed analysis. So you break it down by seniority, department, industry, maturity, and region. Let's dig into that. I want to talk about what makes somebody great. Let's start with seniority and the level of roles.
All of those things you just listed they affect these averages. And
Sure.
we kind of went across the board and to just kind of break down, because again, anecdotally, you hear things like, I'm here in the Bay Area in San Francisco, and they talk about, it's impossible to find engineering talent, so those searches must take forever. Well, when you break down, by the different departments, tech is hard to place, but not as hard as others. So this data gets into a little bit of dispelling some of the preconceived notions about different roles.
And most
seniority.
tech roles are probably not included in this because most of them don't go out to retain search unless they're key hires.
Yeah, unless they're key hires. Yep.
Yeah.
So, building out your engineering team is not, if they're doing it by contingency, that's not accommodated for here.
Got it.
Accounted for. Yep.
Okay. The quickest time to placement and placement rate would be what?
Oh, God. 100 and 0.
No, I get that. But what type of positions are probably going to be the easiest to fill and which ones are going to be the most difficult in terms of seniority?
Yeah, and seniority. So we surfaced some interesting thing on seniority. You would think that as you get more senior, that your placement rate or your days placement would go up. But here, we saw that placement rate on managers actually was the lowest out of all of the seniorities, right? So manager, VP, EVP, C-suite.
Okay.
Manager, you'd think, since there are more of them in an organization and they seem, they'd be more of them in the market, that they would have a better placement rate, but actually they had the worst.
So managers are sitting somewhere around 60% and
60%.
But a shorter time in which you can fill them.
Yep. No, the days of placement is for managers the quickest, but
Sure.
it has the lowest or the lowest placement rate or the highest failure rate. So a little bit more transactional than, say your C-level, which has, next to board members, it has the longest days to placement. But C-level searches have the highest placement rate. And,
They also have the highest failure rate.
the highest failure rate in the role once we've...
Yeah. Typically you get, a couple years, and then if you're not able to deliver, then they drop you and replace you with somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
So that's pretty interesting. How about department? So we're talking about within an organization, you've got legal, finance, you got sales, marketing, operations, IT. I'm looking at your chart here, and there's kind of some interesting things, but they don't surprise me because you have the longest time to fill a role is usually in the IT, management, product development, business development side. So those are the ones that are taking the most time.
Yep, taking the most time, and they're kind of clustered around that. The average placement rate. Legal is sort of the outlier here with the highest placement rate, but the variation is around days to placement. Finance, legal, customer success, they tend to close or place the fastest. As you mentioned, product development, management, IT, they take longer, well above average in terms of time to actually get a placement. So this is the kind of thing when you are hiring a search firm. This is a great way to level set. Not all searches are equal. You've got quite a range of days to placement. So if you are expecting a search to close around 100 days, but you're hiring someone in the management department or product development, your expectations are not going to be aligned to the reality of what the data show.
This is something that's huge for entrepreneurs and business leaders to get, is that this type of search takes a little bit, or actually a lot more time than just going onto a job board or working through a contingency agency and running through a ton of different candidates, hopefully finding the right one. It doesn't surprise me that sales is probably the quickest turnaround at 120 days or so, because
below.
Typically salespeople tend to move around a lot more than all the other departments.
Yep, they're eager to talk on interviews, and they're great on interviews. And by the time you need a salesperson, there's a real urgency to it.
By the time you get out of an interview with the salesperson, you're tired.
Yeah.
And you bought something. All right, how about industry? Let's run through that.
So industry, again, this is one of those things where it's hard to kind of make sense. Education has a great placement rate relative to average, and it's fast. In education and services, the same thing, kind of above average placement rates and faster than average days to placement. You get into consumer internet or media, no surprise, government and nonprofit. Those are taking a lot longer to place.
What's surprising to me, though, is I'm looking at healthcare. So you have on here that actually takes the longest amount of time and has the lowest success rate, placement rate. Yep. So are we talking doctors, nurses, anyone in healthcare or ministry?
You're talking healthcare executives in the healthcare industry. So could be doctors, could be administrators. This is a quasi-professional service, but it's healthcare. And so it's a specialization and requires that the firms doing this work really specialize in this space.
So the longest time to hire we have are media, consumer internet, and then government and nonprofit.
Right.
And you're looking at on average 130 to 135 days.
Yeah, which relative to 123 is not that bad. That's not when you're looking at in aggregate. But what these numbers kind of try to lay out, when we're laying placement rate over days to placement, you want a below average, faster than average days to placement, and you want an above average placement rate. That's good, right? If average is C, you want somebody who's an A player in both how fast they do a search and their history or the track record of successful placements for your particular needs. And so you want to find those who really exceed on these two key metrics.
But gosh, the thing that worries me here is that, yes, it's great that you're filling these, but we don't know quality hire. And so some companies might be hiring B or C players. I've had clients in the past that have come back to me saying, hey, we hired somebody that wasn't as great as we thought it was, and we need to secretly look for somebody new to fill their role. The stick rate is important, I think, if you can get that.
Absolutely. Yeah. Stick rate is important. I will say this, that the industry, the retained search business of placing a candidate, when you are engaged with a client, this is very different. You should have an engaged client who's telling you what an A player looks like, or as a client.
Or you should be able to draw out what an A player looks like, because that's really important.
That's the key, and that is the sort of the key difference between retained and contingency is going through that process, whether you're doing it up front in that kickoff strategy call, or if you're doing it along the process of the 3 or 4 months that you're working on a project. You should, as a team of client and search firm, come to a very clear understanding of what an A player looks like. You're not guessing at a C or a B. You're these are key hires, and that's part of the process and part of the benefit of using a retained search process, a retained search firm. It's like you go through that process either at the beginning through a key process or a key strategy, or you kind of do it by default along the way.
What's surprising to me is that your placement rate and time to fill for technology, software, and services is actually fairly low. I thought it would have been a little bit higher. So we're looking at 70% success rate, which is okay. I thought it would have been lower. And then 120 days or so.
Yep. So faster than average, but below average placement rate, but not by much.
All right. And the last thing I want to go over is region, because this is actually a pretty important piece. My thinking would be, gosh, San Francisco Bay Area, everybody complains it's so tough you and I both work in that realm, right? And everybody complains about how hard it is to find people, but it's actually not the hardest place to find people, is it?
No, that would probably, I think, that would be New York City. It takes the longest, and that's the lowest placement rate.
Wow.
Yeah.
Were you able to find out what factors come into play? I mean, you're looking at 69%.
Yeah.
If you're recruiting in New York City, you have a 69% chance of filling your role within 140 days.
Yep.
Woo, that's crazy.
It takes a long time, and then you have a pretty slim chance of actually making that placement. What is the key factor here in determining, why it takes so long? The answer is, I don't know.
Yeah.
There's so many factors, and this is just one, right? So it's not just the location. You dig deeper into it, you got to figure out, hey, so what were those searches? What did they look like? What were the seniority and industry and department of those searches that actually were run in New York City? They're going to differ from the other. So this is just to give you some illustration of like what you're getting into if you are hiring a search firm. Calibrate your interest in.
But it's also a great tool in which somebody can manage expectations.
Yeah.
So we can look at what the averages are. If I can come in around here, then we're correct. Again, most people run off the premise that 90 days is enough for me to fill a search, but it's not saying that at all. If you're under 115 days, you're doing pretty good.
Yep. And that's it. I mean, if that's the key takeaway from this, there are a bunch, but that should be one that this isn't contingency. You're not going to get that silver bullet placement right out the gate. You're in for it with a consulting engagement with your search firm, and you got to collaborate. Like one of the key determinants of effect on placement rate is client collaboration.
Absolutely.
Clients got to be in it from beginning to end. And if they're not, search firm's going to be struggling, and this placement rate is going to go down, and the days to close is going to go up.
And that is the key takeaway. Both parties have to be 100% on board. Man, we're just about out of time for today's show, Christian. Thanks for your time investment today, and I want to welcome you to the Higher Power Radio community. Now, what would be the best way for members of our community to find out more about you or reach you?
Well, you can go to clockworkrecruiting.com. This information's posted up there, and happy to talk to you.
All right.
Shoot us an email.
Absolutely. And you know what? Just on a personal note, I've taken a look at your platform. I love it. So great job. Keep up the good work. I want to thank our listening audience for tuning into this week's episode of Higher Power. A quick thanks to our team, our engineer, Paul Roberts, our producers, Andrea Ballin, Shanti Ryle, and Ayla Gerard. If you're listening to the podcast, please subscribe, rate, and review. We need your feedback to bring more valuable content to you. You can join the Higher Power Radio community at higherpowerradio.com. That's HIRE. We're not a religious show. Or you can follow us on iTunes, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, Spotify, YouTube. You can follow me on Twitter at RickGerard1. Tune in next week. Our guest is going to be returning guest, Brennan German. He's the president of Bright Talent Resources. We're going to wrap up the year for 2018. And I'm your host, Rick Gerard, and you have been listening to the Higher Power Radio Show. Aloha.
Thank you for listening to Higher Power with Rick Gerard on OC Talk Radio.